Mark had been awake for 19 hours when the green highway sign finally promised a rest stop 2 miles ahead, and that number might as well have been a miracle spelled in reflective paint. He'd started the day in another state, pitched a deal, shaken unfamiliar hands, and then pointed his aging sedan toward home because he couldn't stand another cheap hotel pillow. The road after midnight had its own sound, a low, hollow hum, as if the car was skating on the edge of a drum, and every ripple of asphalt thumped through the steering wheel into his tired wrists. He tried music, then talk radio, then silence, but the silence kept winning and filling up the car like water in a sinking boat. The dashboard clock read 1:13 a.m., glowing a tired orange, and the fuel gauge smiled a thin plastic smile just above a quarter tank, which felt safe enough until it didn't. When he saw the rest stop's cold fluorescent crown rise over the trees, he exhaled for the first time in miles, the kind of breath you give only when someone opens a window in a stale room. He told himself he'd stretch, hit the bathroom, grab a soda, maybe splash water on his face 10 minutes, 15 max, and then finish the last hour home. As he signaled, the highway's loneliness seemed to pause, like the night had been holding its breath, waiting to see if he'd really turn off. He did. The off-ramp curved like a question mark, and in the bright puddle of the parking lot lights, everything looked clean, ordinary, easy, the kind of ordinary that makes you stop noticing you're being watched.
The first thing Mark noticed when he stepped out was how loud his own footsteps sounded. Gravel popped under his shoes like bones you weren't sure belonged to you. The second thing he noticed was the quiet of everything else. No highway roar bleeding over the tree line. No skitter of insects. Not even the faraway whoop of a night bird. The world felt on mute, but the kind where you know the volume button didn't do it. The vending machines stood in a neat row, humming softly. Glass fronts fogged with a faint, stubborn mist as if they were breathing. He walked to the one with sodas and tapped his card. The reader blinked a green welcome LED. Then every pixel on its tiny display lurched into a mosaic. A highway sign, a woman's cheekbone, a ceiling fan turning too slowly, all scrambled and gone before his eyes could focus. He blinked too, harder than he meant to, and told himself it was just the kind of glitch you saw when you drove too long with dry eyes. He pressed the button for a cola. The machine purred, clicked, and then wrote something across its display that wasn't a price, wasn't a code, and wasn't supposed to be possible on a stock screen. "Why did you stop here?" Mark laughed the way a sober man laughs at his first drink too fast, too defensive. He tapped the glass with his knuckle and said, "Cute," to no one, and his voice sounded smaller than he remembered it being. The machine returned to a neutral, polite blue, and the can thunked down a second later like it had never said anything at all. The diner's door sighed when he pushed it open, as if it had been holding itself closed against something, and finally decided to let go. The smell inside was not bad coffee, bleach, something sweet like pie that had been cut 6 hours earlier, but it felt layered, the way a hospital hallway smells like lemon cleaner and endings at the same time. No waitress turned to greet him. No cook shouted a half-friendly insult. A napkin had been folded into a triangle on the counter, like someone practiced being tidy before leaving in a hurry. He slid onto a stool out of habit more than hunger and tapped the counter with 2 fingers, listening for how the laminate answered. It sounded hollow, like there was a pocket of air underneath. The wall clock above the pie case showed 2 hours exactly, even though his phone still insisted 1:24. When he lifted the phone to take a picture the way you take a picture to prove to a future self that you didn't imagine a thing, the camera app stuttered and crashed to a white screen that said no storage even though he had several gigs free. He didn't swear out loud, but a small curse darted across his teeth anyway. On the far booth, a menu had been flipped open, and a child's crayon had left a pale blue line along the margin. The line began under Kid's pancake face and ended halfway across the page like the hand that made it had been lifted by something taller. The coffee pot on the hot plate was half full, and some dark, stubborn ring around the glass insisted it had been there all day. He picked up the pot, sniffed, decided against it, and set it back down. The burner light blinked once like a wink and stayed on. "Hello?" He tried, and the room tried to give the word back to him, but it came back a size smaller. He told himself he'd use the bathroom and go. He could feel sleep pushing on his shoulders with warm hands, guiding him toward bad decisions. The hallway felt longer than it should, as if the architect had stretched it by a foot each year since the building opened. Light fought the dark in tired pulses. The flicker wasn't random, it came in a pattern like someone out of breath trying to keep a song going. He passed the staff-only door and heard nothing behind it, which for some reason felt less true than hearing something. Inside the men's room, the motion sensor tried to decide if he was real, and finally committed to a weak, pearly glow that made the mirrors look like pale water. A single droplet fell from nowhere into the sink and broke the silence in a way that sounded intentional. He leaned over the basin to splash his face, and steam bloomed across the central mirror like a breath. He hadn't run hot water. He could swear he hadn't, but the fog thickened anyway as if the glass itself had lungs. Letters began to appear, not written exactly, but revealed, forming words with the lazy confidence of a message that didn't need to rush. You shouldn't be here. He stood very still, like prey. Okay, he said softly to the empty room, and the word okay ghosted into the fog too, as if the mirror was quoting him back in a voice that came from the glass. He didn't swear out loud, but a small curse darted across his teeth anyway. On the far booth, a menu had been flipped open, and a child's crayon had left a pale blue line along the margin. The line began under Kid's pancake face and ended halfway across the page, like the hand that made it had been lifted by something taller. The coffee pot on the hot plate was half full, and some dark, stubborn ring around the glass insisted it had been there all day. He picked up the pot, sniffed, decided against it, and set it back down. The burner light blinked once like a wink and stayed on. Hello? He tried, and the room tried to give the word back to him, but it came back a size smaller. The stall at the far end creaked open by a thumb's width, then another, the way a mouth opens to test the shape of a word. Mark watched the gap widen and felt the old animal part of his brain reach for an exit his body hadn't found yet. He wiped the mirror with his sleeve, the message smeared but refused to disappear, the way a bruise refuses to be convinced you didn't earn it. On the mirror's lower corner, a small set of numbers appeared where there had been none, like the glass kept a private clock. 2 tile. His phone buzzed once in his pocket with no notification and went still again, like a hand tapping your shoulder from under a table. He backed out, 1 step, then 2, careful not to turn because turning would make the stall reel, and he needed it not to be. When the hallway swallowed him again, the fluorescence calmed into a flat, obedient glow, and for 3 choking heartbeats he almost convinced himself he'd imagined everything and needed sleep more than soda. He considered leaving by the side door, crossing the lot to his car, and letting the highway rinse this place off him in long, fast miles. Then he remembered he hadn't peed. He laughed a messy human sound, and the laugh came back from the tile around him like something that had learned to speak by copying. He took 10 steps toward the glass exit doors and stopped because his body decided to stop. Sometimes your bones remember rules your head forgot. Through the doors, he could see his sedan sitting in its bay like a patient dog, breath frosting the windshield in a faint patch, even though the engine was dead. He reached for the handle and watched his own reflection do the same, and for a fraction of a second, the reflection didn't keep up. His hand moved first. The mirror-world hand, a beat late like a friend who hadn't learned the choreography. The security camera in the corner hummed. A red pinprick glowed on its face the way a seed glows under a child's lamp for a science fair. Mark tilted his head at the corkboard because something about the flyers made his teeth itch. The phone numbers had too many 8s, and the dates were all 22, 22, 22, like the printer had been stuck on the same square of calendar. The headline on the folded newspaper in the rack said, "Area Rest, Stop Closed for Investigation," and below it a smaller line whispered authorities declined to release details, and beneath that the black and white photo was this rest stop, this entrance, this camera. He checked the masthead date without wanting to. The paper said 2, FEB2, and the big clock over the diner's counter nodded along from another room. Cute, he said again, but the word didn't find anything cute to stick to. He lifted the latch. Somewhere down the hall, a payphone rang an impossible sound, clear and patient, like a bell that knows you have time to answer whether you do or not. The payphone rang again, steady and patient, like it knew his name without needing to ask. Mark crossed the tiles because not crossing them felt worse, and the handset was warmer than it should have been when he lifted it. He waited for a voice to announce a prank or a problem, but the first sound was breathing, slow and measured, syncing with his own as if the line were a mirror. "Hello?" he said, and the word traveled down old copper and came back with edges filed off. A woman spoke finally, calm as a nurse, asking, "Are you safe to drive?" And something about the sentence felt rehearsed. "I just stopped for a minute," Mark answered, and the pause on the line felt like a doctor deciding which page of bad news to read first. "You didn't stop," the woman said, and every letter landed like a footstep. "You were stopped." Static brushed his ear, but within it he caught another whisper, thin and layered, like 2 recordings playing at once. "Turn around. Don't open any doors that open for you." "Who is this?" he asked, because questions are the only handles you get when the floor starts shifting. The line clicked, the dial tone returned, and in that plain, steady hum he heard it again, under the tone faint and wrong, a second dial tone breathing in and out like a lung. He checked the masthead date without wanting to. The paper said 2 FEB2, and the big clock over the diner's counter nodded along from another room. "Cute," he said again, but the word didn't find anything cute to stick to. He lifted the latch. Somewhere down the hall, a payphone rang an impossible sound, clear and patient, like a bell that knows you have time to answer whether you do or not. The staff-only door was ajar now, not enough to invite, just enough to accuse him of curiosity if he looked. He pushed it with 2 fingers and found a narrow office smelling like dust that didn't belong to this century. A metal desk held a spiral-bound logbook, and the ink on the top page was a bright, fresh blue that bragged about being new. Every entry listed the same thing in stiff block letters. Closing check, 2R2, all clear, and then the name, repeating Harris until the letters looked like a fence. Taped beside the log were Polaroids. The diner empty, the hall empty, the parking lot empty, and then one more. The same lot with a maroon sedan parked diagonally like a drunk apology. Mark looked closer and recognized the duct tape on his passenger mirror because he'd put it there after a tight garage 6 months back. Someone had written a date on the white border of the photo, but the numbers all sat on top of each other like they refused to be separate. You could read them as any date you wanted, and all of them were correct. He checked the wall clock in the office and it said 2, loyal as a dog to a bad master. A clipboard on a hook listed emergency procedures, and the first line read, if guest is still present at 2:00, do not acknowledge. Schedule resets when unacknowledged. The floor under his shoes vibrated with a low, steady rhythm that he realized wasn't machinery. It was the building breathing in time with that hidden dial tone. The line clicked, the dial tone returned, and in that plain, steady hum he heard it again, under the tone, faint and wrong, a second dial tone breathing in and out like a lung. He checked the masthead date without wanting to. The paper said 2 FEB2 and the big clock over the diner's counter nodded along from another room. Cute, he said again, but the word didn't find anything cute to stick to. He lifted the latch. Somewhere down the hall, a payphone rang an impossible sound, clear and patient, like a bell that knows you have time to answer whether you do or not. He needed air that hadn't already been inside these walls, so he pushed through the glass doors and stepped into the lot that pretended to be neutral ground. The air outside felt staged. The wind lifted his hair in a measured draft and then stopped like a queue had ended. 3 cars sat in the front row now, though he hadn't heard them arrive. Their windows were dark in a way that wasn't just tint, more like absence. He walked past the vending machines and the display scrolled text he didn't want but read anyway. Stay hydrated. Take a break. You look tired. You've been here before. Nope, he told the glass in a voice he reserved for talking himself out of online purchases, but the last line repeated until it overlapped itself and became a blur. At his sedan, he tried the handle and it opened, but the inside smelled like a hotel he hadn't stayed in yet, and for a second the dashboard wasn't his dashboard. It belonged to a different model and a different year. He closed the door gently, as if not to wake something asleep in the passenger seat. On the pavement, a pale, chalky arc curved from the entrance to the exit, like someone had traced the path of a moth that only flew in circles. He followed the arc with his eyes and realized the exit lane bent too soon and fed back into the entrance lane as if the asphalt believed in recycling. Somewhere above him, the security camera drew a perfect red circle in the air with its LED, and he felt placed on a stage that ran the same scene hourly. When he re-entered the diner, the booths were not empty. Shapes sat like smudges left by people who'd kept their seats after the photograph was taken. A waitress stood with a coffee pot angled in a pour that never finished, and the chrome belly of the pot reflected a Mark who looked more tired than he remembered allowing himself to look. Fresh? The waitress asked without moving her mouth, and he realized the voice came from the radio on the counter, tuned to a station that wasn't broadcasting. The dial's orange eye slid a millimeter and a recorded announcement crackled. State authorities remind motorists that Rest Area 47 is closed for investigation until further notice. The announcer took a too long breath and added, quieter, please do not stop. He watched the shadow patron's hands and saw they were not holding cups. They were holding the pauses between words. He backed toward the door and the bell above it didn't ring. It inhaled long and wheezy and held the breath like it had no lungs to let it go. The wall clock lifted both hands off the 2 for an insult of a second, then put them back down like a stagehand resetting a prop. He said, I'm leaving now, and the room nodded with 1,000 tiny reflections that agreed politely without meaning it. Behind the counter, a second coffee pot began to pour into an invisible cup, and the stream of coffee never hit anything. It just fell and fell and fell. Back in the lobby, the payphone dangled like a pendulum that refused to swing, and the exit doors reflected him as 2 marks not quite agreeing on an outline. On the wall, a laminated map of the facility had been stabbed with red arrows, each labeled, You are here, a joke that forgot to be funny. He put the handset to his ear again and heard his own voice from far away ask, Are you safe to drive? The same cadence, the same throat clearing, the same private shame. I'm not staying. he told himself across the line, and the other him whispered, "Don't open what opens first." Something clicked behind the service counter, the sound of a deadbolt that wasn't attached to any visible door, and then the fluorescent tubes dimmed as if a cloud had passed in a room with no sky. He felt the moment the one every trapped thing feels, where you either declare the trap a misunderstanding or you name it correctly and pay the price. Across the glass, the lot looked wider than before, a shallow sea under lights that had learned the color of hospital gowns. He squared his shoulders the way you do when you decide to walk calmly through a room you should run through. "If this place needs an answer," he said out loud, "it can ask me while I'm leaving." And then the fire alarm chirped once, polite as a librarian, and printed a single red word on its tiny LCD, "Acknowledged." The alarm's tiny screen kept the word "acknowledged" alive like a pilot light, and Mark felt the syllables settle on his skin as a sentence. "You're part of this now." He stepped behind the service counter because the front doors had started to feel like a mouth, and mouths are built for swallowing. A narrow utility corridor ran behind the diner, low ceiling, hot breath of ductwork, and a delivery gate hung halfway down like a shrug. He remembered the voice on the phone, "Don't open any doors that open for you," and looked at the choices like a test he hadn't studied for. The delivery gate would be easy. The chain hoist hung ready, no lock, no resistance, the path that wanted him to want it. The fire door, by contrast, wore warnings like armor, metal bar, paint scabbed to bare steel, a sign promising alarms and consequences he could survive. Between them, a cabinet of breaker switches waited with tiny labels: diner, lobby, lot A, AUX, and one unlabeled switch at the bottom, its toggle rubbed shiny by fingers that needed secrets. He touched the unlabeled toggle and felt a hum inside the wall pause, like something listening to its own heart. He flipped it down, and every fluorescent tube in the building exhaled to dark at once, the red exit signs floating like embers in a cave. In the afterhum, far away but intimate, a single payphone ring threaded the air again, patient as gravity. He pushed the fire door, and it did not budge, not at first. It pushed back with the calm of a thing that believed in itself. He set his shoulder again, counted to 3 out loud in a voice that sounded borrowed, and shoved the barb at his palms, and the gasket squealed, and, inch by inch, the door surrendered a line of cold. No siren howled. The only sound was his breath and a hush that felt human, like a room holding still to watch a trick. "Hard way," he muttered, because sometimes saying the strategy aloud keeps you loyal to it. The door gave a final grunt and swung to a wedge that admitted a knife of moonlight and the taste of night that had not been processed by air handlers. Beyond the gap, the parking lot lay changed again. His sedan faced backward now, angled toward the tree line as if it had rolled there in its sleep, and the security camera in the eave was a dead eye with no red pupil. He didn't look at the delivery gate. He didn't need to. He could feel it open itself the rest of the way, chain clinking softly, obedient, inviting, wrong. Mark slipped through the wedge, shoulder scraping paint, and let the heavy door settle behind him until the latch caught with a small, decent sound. The building stayed dark, a big animal holding its breath. Somewhere inside, the payphone rang one last time and then, like a mercy, stopped. Up close. His car looked like his car from every angle, except the kind you don't usually check. The VIN plate on the dash was a smear of numbers that wouldn't sit still. And the odometer blinked 200.2 and then 02.0. And then 2 anger, as if distance and time were arguing. He opened the door, and the interior smell was his again, coffee from 2 days ago. Winter rubber mats, the ghost of a fast food bag he kept meaning to throw out. He turned the key, and the engine came alive without the polite cough it usually gave first thing in the morning. The dash clock snapped to 2 hours and held. The main exit lane still curled back toward the entrance like a question mark bending into itself, so he chose the service lane, a thin black ribbon skirting the dumpster corral and a chain-link gate that had been taught to stay closed. The gate's padlock wore a film of rust, theatrical and easy to pity, but the bottom of the fence bowed where a snowplow had kissed it some winter and never called back. He put the car in drive and eased through the bent corner, the metal teeth of the chain link combing the paint along his rear door with a sound like a firm no. Beyond the fence, the maintenance road narrowed to a single lane of cracked asphalt and grew a crown of weeds where 2 counties argued about whose budget should fix it. The cattails in the drainage ditch shivered with the breeze he finally believed in. He checked his mirrors out of habit and saw the rest stop behind him, smaller, dimmer, then suddenly a step closer, then far again like a landmark in a dream that moves when you don't watch it. Up close, his car looked like his car from every angle, except the kind you don't usually check. The VIN plate on the dash was a smear of numbers that wouldn't sit still, and the odometer blinked 200.2, and then 002.0, and then 2 series, as if distance and time were arguing. He opened the door, and the interior smell was his again, coffee from 2 days ago. Winter rubber mats, the ghost of a fast food bag he kept meaning to throw out. He turned the key, and the engine came alive without the polite cough it usually gave first thing in the morning. The dash clock snapped to 2 and held. The main exit lane still curled back toward the entrance like a question mark bending into itself, so he chose the service lane, a thin black ribbon skirting the dumpster corral, and a chain-link gate that had been taught to stay closed. The gate's padlock wore a film of rust, theatrical and easy to pity, but the bottom of the fence bowed where a snowplow had kissed it some winter and never called back. The maintenance lane spat him onto a county road he didn't recognize, even though he knew these counties, these hedgerows, these particular ghosts of barns. That's the thing about getting out, you're out, but you're not sure where. He stopped at the T and let the turn signal tick like a small heart learning a new rhythm. Left looked like town, right looked like a longer night. His phone woke up enough to offer a single bar, and then, with a child's effort, delivered one voicemail unknown caller, 2 a.m., which was funny if the universe had a sense of humor. He pressed play and heard his own voice whisper, "Don't open what opens first," and then a softer voice under it, the nurse voice. Older now, maybe his, maybe nobody's, say, "If you leave, never look straight at it again." Mirrors count. He turned left and the tires grabbed the world the way tires are supposed to, and the road unscrolled like film through a projector that had finally learned the speed. Mile by mile, his dash clock fought and lost, grudgingly admitting 2:07, 2:18, 2:31, as though time had to be negotiated. 15 minutes later, a radio station found him and sang a song he hated, and he loved it so much he almost cried because hate and love both mean you're alive and outside. At the town limit, a newspaper box squatted by a diner that did not know him, and today's paper in the window shouted about a ball game, not a rest stop. In the rear view, very small, the rest stoplights still burned like a ship at sea that can't decide which shore to haunt. He angled the mirror down until it showed only his back seat and drove on. Mark slept 12 hours that day and woke like a diver who'd been hauled up too fast. The bends in his thoughts took a while to settle. Over coffee, he unfolded the paper his neighbor had tossed onto the porch, and on page 3 was a short piece about Rest Area 47. Still closed, no reopening date, no comment from state police. He scrolled his call log, not because he wanted to, but because the part of the brain that touches stoves needs to see the blisters. 4 entries sat in a row at the top. U210 AM, U2 LAM, U2 LAM, U2 SAO AM. The voicemail icon said 1, then 0, then 1 again, like a coin on its edge choosing which way to be true. He set the phone face down and it buzzed once anyway, a phantom notification that spelled nothing. Out the window, the day practiced being normal dogs. Mail truck, sunlight laying honest rectangles on the neighbor's lawn. He took a sip of cola from the can he didn't remember buying, and a thin line of condensation traced the words printed under the rim where labels don't go. "Why did you stop here?" He didn't answer. Some places are questions you live with. If he ever drives that stretch again, he tells himself. And the green sign appears like a miracle spelled in reflective paint. He'll keep both hands on the wheel and read the message the way you read stars. Pretty, distant, none of your business.